In the quiet village of Nyasai, nestled between rolling hills and dry desert sands, a tale as old as time itself was passed down through generations. The villagers believed that once every 1,000 years, the moon shed enchanted tears, transforming the arid wasteland surrounding their village into a paradise. These tears, luminous and rare, were said to possess the power to grant visions of the future to those who witnessed them. The elders guarded this knowledge fiercely, allowing only a select few to be present when the moon wept. Nia, a bright and curious 12-year-old girl, had heard the legend many times. Often as a baby and raised by an elderly woman named Mama Juma, she felt like she had no true place in the village. But her fascination with the moon was undeniable. Each night, she would stare up at the sky, wondering what mysteries the celestial body held. She could not have known that her connection to the moon ran deeper than mere curiosity. As the time for the moon's tears approached, the village was buzzing with anticipation. Every 1,000 years, a group of villagers was chosen to witness the sacred event. They would be led to the hidden oasis in the desert where the moon's magic could be fully observed. To Nia's surprise, her name was called. It was an unexpected honor, for she had never considered herself special. Whispers followed her everywhere after the announcement. "Why her?" some villagers murmured. "She's not one of us." Nia couldn't shake the feeling of unease, but Mama Juma reassured her, saying, "The moon chooses who it wills. There's a reason for everything." Still, Nia couldn't help but wonder why she had been selected. What was her place in this ancient ritual? The night of the ceremony was like no other. The air was thick with anticipation, and the village gathered in the square to send off the chosen ones. Nia was dressed in a white ceremonial robe, her heart racing as she stood with the others. Among the group were elders, respected members of the village, and a few younger people like herself. But Nia was the youngest, and she felt the weight of the stares from those who doubted her worthiness. As the sun set, the group began their journey into the desert, guided by an elder named Nuru. He was a stern man with eyes that seemed to see through to one's soul. Nia couldn't help but feel a chill whenever he looked at her. "The moon's tears come but once in 1,000 years, Nuru said gravely. "Only those pure of heart may see them and live to tell the tale." Nia swallowed hard, unsure if she was prepared for what lay ahead. The journey across the desert was long and arduous. The once familiar sand stretched out endlessly before them, and as the hours passed, Nia began to feel the weight of the journey pressing down on her. The group walked in silence, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the moon would soon rise. Nia's feet ached, and her mind raced with questions. What would she see? Would the moon truly weep? The others seemed calm and collected, their faces stoic as they pressed forward. But Nia felt out of place, like an intruder in a sacred ritual she barely understood. Just as she was about to voice her doubts, Mama Juma, who had accompanied her, gently touched her shoulder. "Stay strong, child," she whispered. "The moon has chosen you for a reason." But Nia couldn't help but wonder, was it truly the moon that had chosen her, or something else entirely? As the group neared the hidden oasis, Nia felt a strange sensation wash over her. Her vision blurred for a moment, and then, without warning, she was somewhere else entirely. She stood in a field of green, surrounded by blooming flowers, the air thick with the scent of earth after rain. But something was wrong. The sky was dark, and in the distance, she saw shadows moving, figures cloaked in mist, their faces obscured. Nia blinked, and just as quickly as the vision had come, it was gone. She was back in the desert, her heart pounding in her chest. No one else seemed to notice her brief absence, but Nia knew something was terribly wrong. What had she just seen? And why did it fill her with such dread? After hours of walking, the group finally arrived at the oasis. It was a lush paradise hidden away in the heart of the desert, just as the legends described. Crystal clear water shimmered in the moonlight, and tall palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. Nia felt a sense of a wash over her. This place was magical, and for a brief moment, all her fears melted away. The group gathered around the edge of the water, their eyes turning to the sky as the full moon began its ascent. Nia's heart raced as she waited for the tears to fall. But even as the others focused on the moon, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. As the moon reached its highest point in the sky, a hush fell over the group. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and Nia felt a tingling sensation run through her body. Then, it happened. A single tear slid down the face of the moon, glowing with an otherworldly light as it descended toward the oasis. The tear hit the water with a soft ripple, and in that moment, the entire oasis seemed to come alive. Flowers bloomed, the air filled with the scent of jasmine, and the desert beyond the oasis shimmered as if it, too, had been touched by the moon's magic. But as the others marveled at the sight, Nia felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. In the aftermath of the moon's tears, Nia began to experience strange and terrifying visions. The first one came that very night, as she lay by the oasis, trying to sleep. Her mind was filled with images of fire, of her village consumed by flames, and of shadowy figures stalking through the streets. She saw people she loved, Mama Juma, her friends, and neighbors, screaming in terror as the flames closed in. Nia woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, but everything was quiet. The others were still sleeping, and the oasis remained peaceful. But Nia knew what she had seen. It wasn't just a dream, it was a vision of the future. And if she didn't do something, her village would be in danger. Over the next few days, Nia's visions grew more frequent and more disturbing. She saw images of drought, famine, and war. The peaceful life she had always known was being ripped apart in her mind's eye, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Each vision left her feeling more helpless than the last, and the more she tried to understand them, the more confused she became. But it wasn't just the visions that were troubling her. Nia began to feel a presence, something dark and ancient, lurking just beyond the edge of her consciousness. It watched her in her dreams and followed her during the day. And as the days passed, she became convinced that whatever it was, it didn't want her to survive long enough to share what she had seen. One night, as Nia lay awake by the oasis, she heard a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it filled her mind completely. "You should not have seen what you saw," the voice said. "The future is not yours to know." Nia sat up, her heart racing. The others were still asleep, unaware of the voice that echoed in her mind. "Who are you?" Nia whispered into the darkness. There was no response at first, but then she felt a cold breeze brush against her skin. "I am the guardian of the moon's tears," the voice said. "And you are not meant to live." Nia froze as the chilling voice echoed in her mind. The guardian of the moon's tears. She had never heard of such a being in the village's tales. Her heart pounded in her chest as the cold air pressed against her skin, whispering, "Your visions threaten the balance. You should not have been chosen." Nia clenched her fist. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "Why was I chosen? What is happening to me?" The voice remained silent for a moment before responding, "You were chosen by fate, but fate is not always kind. You must forget what you've seen, or the darkness will claim you." With that, the presence vanished, leaving Nia shaken and uncertain. But one thing was clear, someone or something did not want her to survive long enough to warn the others. The following morning, Nia's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Her friends and the other chosen ones had seen her tossing and turning in her sleep, murmuring strange things. Concerned, Mama Juma pulled her aside. "What's happening, child?" she asked gently, her old eyes searching Nia's face for answers. You haven't been yourself since the ceremony. Nia hesitated. How could she explain the visions, the voice, the impending doom? She felt a heavy weight in her chest. I don't know, she whispered. I'm seeing things, terrible things. Mama Jumo frowned but nodded in understanding. The moon's magic is powerful. It can show us both light and darkness. But remember, not all that is seen should be believed. Nia wanted to believe Mama Jumo, but the terror of her visions was too real. Could they truly be just illusions? That night, Nia had another vision. She was standing at the edge of the oasis, looking out over the desert when she saw them, shadows creeping across the dunes, faceless figures moving silently toward her. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The shadows reached for her, their hands cold and empty. She woke with a start, her breath shallow and her skin slick with sweat. But this time, the vision didn't fade. The shadows she had seen in her dream were real, figures moving in the darkness, watching the group from the edge of the oasis. Her heart pounded in her chest as fear took hold. She wasn't the only one seeing visions anymore. Something dark was coming for them all. Nia had no time to warn the others before the shadows attacked. They moved silently, like whispers in the wind, slipping through the oasis with inhuman speed. The chosen ones awoke in a panic, struggling to understand what was happening. Nia saw one of the elders fall, his face pale as a shadow passed through him like a ghost. It wasn't a physical attack, these shadows were something else, something that drained life and hope from their victims. She could feel their cold presence closing in on her, and she knew she had to act. With a surge of adrenaline, Nia grabbed a nearby branch, swinging it wildly at the approaching figures. To her surprise, the shadows recoiled, hissing as if in pain. They weren't invincible. Nia's eyes widened with realization. She could fight back. The attack left the group shaken and confused. Several elders had fallen, and the survivors were huddled together, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Nia, still clutching the branch, felt her heart race as the others looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. What were those things? Someone asked, voice trembling. Nuru, the elder who had led them, stepped forward, his expression grave. They are the spirits of the desert, ancient protectors of the moon's tears. They come to defend the balance. But why they would attack us? His voice trailed off, and his eyes flicked to Nia. Nia swallowed hard. She knew why. The visions. Whatever future she had seen was a threat to these spirits, and they would stop at nothing to silence her. After the attack, it became clear to the group that staying in the oasis was no longer safe. The shadows could return at any moment, and there was no telling if they would survive another assault. Nuru gathered the remaining elders to discuss a plan. We must leave the oasis and return to the village, he said, his voice low but steady. But we cannot go back the way we came. The desert is too vast, and without the moon's magic to guide us, we'll be lost. Nia listened as the group debated their options, her mind still spinning from the night's events. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. But she also knew that if they didn't leave soon, they might not survive at all. As the group prepared to leave the oasis, Nia's visions became more intense. This time, they were clearer, images of people she trusted turning against her, accusing her of bringing the shadows upon them. She saw Nuru, Mama Jumo, and even some of the other chosen ones, their faces twisted with anger and fear. You brought this upon us, they screamed in her mind. It's because of you that the spirits are angry. Nia's stomach churned with dread. Could her visions be showing her the truth? Would the people she cared about turn on her if they learned the full extent of what she had seen? She wasn't sure who she could trust anymore, and the weight of her secret became almost unbearable. The group set off into the desert once again, this time taking a different route that Nuru assured them would lead them safely back to the village. But the journey was grueling, and the fear of another attack weighed heavily on everyone's mind. Nia walked in silence, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the shadows. The visions haunted her, making it hard to focus. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, destruction, and betrayal. The desert stretched endlessly before them, and as the sun began to set, the group grew more desperate. Nia could see the exhaustion on their faces, the fear that gnawed at their hearts. And deep down, she feared that the worst was yet to come. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the wind began to pick up. At first, it was a soft breeze, but soon it became a full-blown desert storm. Sand whipped through the air, stinging their skin and making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "Everyone, stay close," Nuru shouted over the howling wind. The group huddled together, trying to shield themselves from the storm, but the desert seemed determined to tear them apart. Nia struggled to keep up, her feet sinking into the shifting sand. The storm was like nothing she had ever experienced, wild, relentless, and almost alive. As the wind howled in her ears, she heard something else, a voice carried on the wind. "You cannot escape your fate, Nia." By the time the storm finally subsided, the group was disoriented and lost. The landscape around them had changed, the familiar landmarks buried beneath the shifting sands. Nuru stood at the front of the group, his face pale with worry. "We've lost our way," he admitted quietly. "We'll have to find shelter and wait for the stars to guide us." The group murmured in despair, but there was nothing they could do. They set up a makeshift camp in the middle of the desert, huddling together for warmth as the night grew colder. Nia sat apart from the others, staring up at the sky, hoping for some kind of sign. But all she saw was darkness. In the dead of night, as the group lay exhausted and anxious, a figure appeared on the horizon. At first, Nia thought it was another vision, a shadowy figure like the ones she had seen before. But as it drew closer, she realized this was different. The figure was cloaked in robes, moving slowly but with purpose. Nuru stood, his hand reaching for a blade, but the figure raised a hand in peace. "I mean you no harm," a voice called out, smooth and calm. "I have been watching you." The group tensed as the stranger approached. He was tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "You are lost," he said simply, "but I can help you. For a price." The stranger's words hung in the air, sending a chill through the group. Nuru stepped forward, his face hard. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what is this price you speak of?" The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I am a wanderer, a keeper of the old ways. I know the desert, and I know the path that can lead you to safety. But all things come at a cost." Nia felt her heart race. There was something unsettling about this man, something that made her instinctively wary. But the group was desperate, and they had no other options. After a long, tense silence, Nuru nodded. "We'll hear your price." The stranger's smile widened. "One of you must stay behind. Only then will the path be revealed." A stunned silence followed the stranger's declaration. The group exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Leave someone behind. It was unthinkable. But the desert was vast, and without the stranger's guidance, they might all perish. Nia felt a surge of defensiveness rise within her. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice tight. "But I can't just ignore it. I've seen what's coming, and if we don't use this power, we'll all be destroyed." Nuru's expression hardened. "Or perhaps it's the power itself that will destroy us." After days of travel, the group finally made it back to the village. But the sight that greeted them was far from the peaceful home they had left behind. The village was in turmoil. Crops had withered, the river had dried up, and the people were starving. Nia's heart sank as she saw the suffering around her. This was the future she had seen in her visions, the beginning of the end. The moon's tears had brought them visions of the future, but they hadn't prepared her for the pain that came with it. As the group approached the village square, Nia noticed the stares from the villagers. They looked at her with fear and suspicion, as if they knew she was different, that she had been marked by something beyond their understanding. The group was summoned to meet with the village elders, who were desperate for answers. They had heard rumors of the moon's tears, of the spirits, and of the dark forces that now plagued their land. "You were supposed to bring hope," one of the elders said, his voice trembling. "But instead, you've brought this curse upon us." Nia felt the weight of their accusations like a stone in her chest. She wanted to explain what had happened, to tell them about the visions and the power of the crystal. But she knew they wouldn't understand. They were afraid of the unknown, afraid of the future. And deep down, Nia feared they might be right. As the village struggled to cope with the growing famine, the shadows returned. This time, they were more numerous, more aggressive, sweeping through the village like a dark tide. Nia's visions had shown her this moment, but knowing didn't make it any easier. The villagers fought back as best they could, but their weapons were useless against the spectral forms. Nia knew what she had to do. She grabbed the crystal from her bag and held it up, feeling the power surge through her once more. The shadows hesitated, as if sensing the strength within her. But instead of retreating, they surged forward, drawn to the crystal's energy. Nia's heart raced as she realized the terrible truth: the crystal wasn't a weapon. It was a beacon. As the shadows swarmed the village, the people began to turn on Nia. They saw the crystal in her hands, glowing with unnatural light, and they connected it to the attack. "It's her," someone shouted. "She's the one who brought this upon us." Panic spread like wildfire, and soon the village was in chaos. Nia tried to explain, to tell them that she was trying to help, but no one would listen. Even Mama Juma, who had raised her, looked at her with fear in her eyes. Nia felt a crushing sense of isolation. The visions of betrayal had come true. She was alone, and the village she had once called home had turned against her. With the village in turmoil and the shadows continuing their assault, Nuru made a difficult decision. "We must leave," he told the remaining elders. "If we stay here, we will all perish." A small group of survivors gathered what little they could carry and prepared to leave the village. Nia, feeling the weight of guilt on her shoulders, followed silently. She knew that the shadows were drawn to the crystal, and that as long as she held it, she would never be safe. As they left the village behind, Nia looked back one last time. The place she had once called home was now a memory, lost to the darkness that had consumed it. In the midst of their journey through the wilderness, the familiar cold presence of the guardian spirit returned. This time, it appeared not as a voice, but as a figure, tall, dark, and wreathed in shadows. "You still cling to the crystal," it said, its voice a whisper that cut through the night air. "But it is not too late to undo the damage you have caused." Nia felt a surge of defiance. "Undo the damage? You're the one who sent the shadows." The spirit's eyes glinted in the moonlight. "The shadows are a consequence of your choices, not mine. Surrender the crystal, and I will stop the darkness from spreading further." Nia hesitated. Could she trust the spirit? Or was this just another trap? The spirit's offer weighed heavily on Nia's mind. If she surrendered the crystal, would the shadows really stop? Or was the spirit lying to her, trying to take the power for itself? The others watched her, waiting for her decision. Nuru approached her, his expression serious. "This is your burden, Nia," he said quietly. "But remember, power always comes with a price." Nia looked at the crystal, glowing faintly in her hands. She had seen what it could do, the destruction it had caused. But she had also seen glimpses of its potential to protect, to save. With a deep breath, she made her decision. Nia held the crystal tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped forward, meeting the spirit's gaze. "If I give this to you," she said, her voice steady, "you must promise to stop the shadows. Promise to protect the people I love." The spirit's dark form seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "I am bound by the laws of this land," it said. "If you surrender the crystal, the balance will be restored. But you must trust in the old ways." Nia's hands trembled as she extended the crystal toward the spirit. The moment it left her fingers, the air around her seemed to shift. The crystal floated toward the spirit, who caught it in its shadowy grasp. The spirit's eyes glowed briefly, and then, with a final whisper, it vanished into the night. The moment the spirit disappeared with the crystal, the shadows began to retreat. Their dark forms dissolved into the night, slipping away as quietly as they had come. The survivors watched in stunned silence as the village, now far behind them, was released from the grip of darkness. For a brief moment, Nia felt a sense of relief. The immediate danger had passed, and the shadows were no longer chasing them. But the weight of what she had given up, the power she had relinquished, still hung heavy on her heart. Had she made the right choice? With the shadows gone, the group found themselves in a rare moment of peace. They set up camp in a secluded valley, far from the village and the desert, where they hoped to regroup and plan their next move. But even in this peaceful place, tension lingered. Nia could feel the distrust in the air, the unspoken fear that still gripped the survivors. They had seen what the crystal could do, and they knew that its power had come at a cost. Nia kept to herself, unsure of her place among the group. She had given up the crystal, but the visions hadn't stopped. And now, without the power to protect herself, she felt more vulnerable than ever. As the days passed, it became clear that their peace would not last. Strange things began to happen in the valley, animals behaving erratically, the weather shifting without warning, and unsettling dreams that plagued the survivors. Nia felt the presence of something dark and ancient, watching them from the shadows. It wasn't the spirit of the desert this time, it was something else, something older and more dangerous. The balance had been restored, but at what cost? One night, Nia had a vision unlike any she had experienced before. Instead of the future, she saw the past, a time long before the village, before the moon's tears had become a legend. She saw a great kingdom, thriving in the heart of the desert, ruled by powerful beings who wielded the very magic of the moon. But their power had grown too great, and the balance had been shattered. The spirits had risen against them, and the kingdom had fallen into ruin, buried beneath the sands of time. When Nia awoke, she understood. The power of the moon's tears was too great for any one person to control. That was why the spirits had guarded it so fiercely. And that was why she had been chosen. As Nia pondered her vision, the spirit returned once more. This time, it did not come with threats or demands. It appeared quietly, its form less menacing than before. "You have seen the truth," it said. "The power of the moon's tears is not meant to be held by mortals. But now, you must face a choice." Nia felt her heart race. What choice? The spirit's eyes glowed softly. The balance of the world is fragile. The power of the moon's tears must remain hidden, or it will bring ruin once more. But to keep it hidden, you must sacrifice something dear to you. Nia swallowed hard. She had already given up the crystal. What more could the spirits want from her? The spirit's words weighed heavily on Nia's mind. What could she possibly sacrifice that would keep the balance intact? She had already given up the crystal and the power it held. Was that not enough? The spirit's gaze was unwavering. "You must sacrifice your future," it said softly. "The visions you have seen, the life you wish to protect, all of it must be relinquished. Nia's heart sank. Her future. Her dreams of saving her village, of leading a peaceful life. Could she really give that up? But deep down, she knew the answer. The future she had seen was not hers to control. It was the power of the moon's tears that had given her the visions, and now that power had to be relinquished. Before Nia could make her decision, the spirit granted her one final vision. This time, she saw the world as it would be if the power of the moon's tears was allowed to remain unchecked. Destruction, chaos, and suffering spread across the land, with no hope of redemption. But then the vision shifted, showing her a world where the power was hidden, where balance was restored. It wasn't a perfect future, but it was one where her people could survive, where the land could heal. When the vision ended, Nia felt a deep sense of clarity. She knew what she had to do. Nia stood alone at the edge of the valley, the spirit by her side. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but she knew it was the only way to protect those she loved. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice steady. The spirit nodded, its form shimmering in the moonlight. "You will no longer see the future," it said. "Your visions will fade, and the power of the moon's tears will be lost to you. But in doing so, you will restore the balance." Nia closed her eyes, taking one last deep breath. She had spent so long fighting to protect her people, to change the future she had seen. But now, she understood that true power wasn't in controlling the future, it was in letting go. The moment Nia made her decision, a wave of calm washed over her. The spirit extended a hand, and with a soft touch, it removed the power of the visions from her mind. Nia felt a strange emptiness, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, the constant barrage of images and warnings was gone. The world around her seemed quieter, more peaceful. The future was no longer her burden to bear. The spirit gave her a final nod before fading into the night, leaving Nia alone with her thoughts. She had given up her gift, but she had saved the world from a much darker fate. With the visions gone and the power of the moon's tears relinquished, Nia returned to the camp. The others could sense the change in her, though they didn't know the full extent of what had happened. Nuru approached her, his face softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did what had to be done," he said quietly. "You've protected us all." Nia nodded, though a part of her still mourned the loss of the power she had once held. But she knew it was the right choice. Now, she could focus on rebuilding, on helping her people without the burden of the future weighing her down. Over the next few days, the survivors began to rebuild their lives. The valley they had settled in was fertile, and with time, they would be able to create a new home. Nia worked alongside them, planting seeds, gathering supplies, and doing whatever she could to help. The others began to trust her again, though there were still whispers of the power she had once wielded. But Nia didn't mind. She was content with her place among them, no longer burdened by the fear of what was to come. For the first time in a long while, Nia felt at peace. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, Mama Juma approached Nia. Her old eyes twinkled with warmth as she took Nia's hands in her own. "You've done more than anyone could have asked of you," Mama Juma said softly. "You've saved us all, child." Nia felt a lump form in her throat. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. "I had help." Mama Juma smiled, pulling Nia into a gentle embrace. "You have always had the strength inside you, Nia. The moon may have shown you the way, but it was your heart that made the right choices." Nia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Mama Jumo's words wrap around her like a blanket. She was finally at peace with her choices. As the seasons passed, the survivors from the valley began to make their way back to the village. The land was healing, the shadows had retreated, and the people were ready to reclaim what had been lost. Nia stood at the edge of the village, watching as the familiar sights and sounds of home returned. It wasn't the same village she had left behind, it was something new, something stronger. The people welcomed her with open arms, no longer afraid of the power she had once held. They saw her not as a bringer of doom, but as a protector, someone who had sacrificed everything to save them. Upon their return, the village elders gathered to acknowledge the sacrifices that had been made. They called upon Nia, asking her to stand before them in the village square. "You have proven yourself in ways none of us could have imagined," one of the elders said, his voice filled with respect. "The power of the moon's tears was a burden no one should have had to bear. But you carried it with grace, and you saved us all." Nia bowed her head, feeling a sense of humility wash over her. She hadn't sought recognition or praise, she had only done what she believed was right. But the acknowledgement from the elders filled her with a quiet sense of pride. As the village continued to rebuild, Nuru became a trusted mentor to Nia. He had seen the struggles she had faced, the choices she had made, and he knew that she still had a role to play in the village's future. "You have a gift, Nia," he said one day as they walked through the village together. "Not the visions, something deeper. A wisdom that few possess." Nia smiled, though she still felt unsure of her place in the world. "I'm just trying to help," she said quietly. Nuru nodded. "And that is exactly why you will succeed." As the village elders grew older, they began to look to the next generation for leadership. And though Nia had never sought power or authority, the people began to turn to her for guidance. She had proven herself time and time again, and her selflessness had earned her the trust of the entire village. The elders approached her one day with an unexpected request. "We want you to lead us, Nia," they said. "To guide our village into the future." Nia felt a surge of emotions, honor, fear, and responsibility. But she knew that she couldn't turn them down. The village needed her, and she was ready to step into the role they were offering. Years passed, and under Nia's leadership, the village thrived. The land had healed, and the people had found a new sense of purpose. The moon's tears had come and gone, but their memory remained, a reminder of the power that had once been wielded and the sacrifices that had been made. One night, as Nia stood beneath the stars, she looked up at the moon, now full and bright in the sky. It no longer held the same mysteries for her, but it was still a source of wonder. And as she gazed up at the celestial body, she felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but that was okay. She had learned that the true power was not in knowing what was to come, but in being able to face it with courage. As the next generation of villagers grew, Nia began to teach them the lessons she had learned. She told them of the moon's tears, of the power that had once threatened their world, and of the sacrifices that had been made to protect the balance. But she also taught them something more important, that the future was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, no matter how uncertain it might be. And as the cycle of life continued, the village flourished, guided by the wisdom of the past and the hope of the future. Years later, as Nia grew older and the village continued to thrive, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The moon's tears had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined, but they had also given her the strength to shape her own destiny. The village had faced many trials, but they had emerged stronger, united by the shared belief that they could overcome anything as long as they stood together. And as Nia looked out over the village she had helped rebuild, she knew that her legacy, like the moon's tears, would continue to shine, guiding the future generations who would follow in her footsteps.